I've told a lot of horror stories over the years, but this is one that still makes me hesitate before answering my phone late at night. Because if you've ever spent time in the mountains of West Virginia, you've probably heard someone say that not every child you meet in the woods is really a child. I used to laugh at stories like that. I don't anymore. Hello everyone, and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. This is where we explore unsettling horror stories rooted in ordinary places, hidden secrets, and the moments that forever change the people who survive them. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and remember that tonight's story contains disturbing themes involving missing children, psychological horror, and supernatural mystery. There are certain stories that refuse to fade, no matter how much time passes. This is one of those stories for me. I've replayed every conversation, every phone call, and every decision more times than I can count. Even now, I'm not completely sure whether what happened in the forests of southern West Virginia can be explained by grief, guilt, or something that had been waiting in those mountains long before any of us were born. This happened just outside Fayetteville, West Virginia. People around here grow up respecting the mountains. They hike them. They hunt in them. They raise families beside them. But there are also places that longtime locals rarely mention after dark. Places where old stories are spoken quietly, and only among people who already know better than to ask too many questions. At the center of this story was a school counselor named Claire Whitman. Until last October, she worked at a small elementary school, serving families from the surrounding mountain communities. The principal, James Dixon, believed every problem could be solved with discipline and order. The vice principal, Miriam Henderson, was known for calming frightened children with little more than a kind smile and a peppermint from her purse. From the outside, their school looked like hundreds of others across rural America. Yellow buses lined up every morning. Parents waved from pickup trucks. Friday night football brought the town together. Church potlucks filled the weekends. Life followed familiar routines, and everyone assumed they knew everyone else's story. Then the annual autumn field trip to Babcock State Park changed everything. 6 fourth graders disappeared during what should have been an ordinary afternoon nature walk. Hundreds of volunteers searched until sunset. State police arrived. Parents walked the trails calling their children's names. 3 hours later, the 6 students were found standing silently around an abandoned yellow school bus buried deep in the woods. They were smiling. Everyone heard children laughing, but none of the 6 ever moved their lips. After that day, Principal James Dixon began locking rooms that had always been open. School events were quietly canceled. Questions about the field trip were ignored, and anyone who asked too many was told to let the investigation run its course. At first, Claire convinced herself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Shock affects children differently. Trauma changes memories. Fear makes people imagine impossible things. Then, at exactly 2:13 in the morning, her phone rang. A little girl's trembling voice whispered, "Miss Claire, we're still in the woods." Behind her came the sound of dozens of children laughing together. That was long before the abandoned mansion, before the hidden school records, before the forgotten photographs, before Claire discovered that some children had disappeared into those forests decades earlier, and something wearing their faces had walked back out. To understand how any of that became possible, we have to go back to the morning The fourth grade class boarded the buses for what everyone believed would be an ordinary school field trip. The day started like countless other school trips across West Virginia. Teachers checked attendance. Parents snapped photos before the buses left, and the children buzzed with excitement about spending the day outdoors. Nothing about that crisp autumn morning suggested that, by sunset, an entire town would begin questioning whether something ancient had been waiting in the forest all along. The morning after I received that impossible phone call, I drove north to Blennerhassett Mansion. The historic house sat beneath a pale blue moon that refused to disappear with the dawn, its weathered brick walls wrapped in thick mist drifting off the Ohio River. The place was famous for its history, but that morning it felt abandoned, as though every visitor had fled hours earlier. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, yet the sound seemed swallowed by an unnatural silence. Miriam Henderson was waiting on the front porch. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled around a folder so tightly that the edges had bent. Without saying hello, she led me through the mansion's dark hallways. Dust floated through thin beams of blue light leaking in from tall windows. Every room seemed frozen in time. Portraits watched us from cracked walls, and our footsteps echoed farther than they should have. Somewhere deep inside the house, I thought I heard children laughing. The sound stopped the moment I listened for it. Miriam finally broke the silence. 25 years ago, she whispered, James Dixon wasn't a principal. He was a substitute teacher on another field trip near Babcock State Park. She unfolded brittle attendance sheets and faded permission slips she'd secretly taken from the locked records room. The bus broke down. The children heard laughter coming from the trees. They followed it. She swallowed hard. Only James came back. As I flipped through the paperwork, my stomach tightened. The names listed on those yellowed records matched the names of the 6 children who had disappeared on our field trip. The same first names, the same birthdays. Even the parents' signatures looked identical. It wasn't coincidence. It was impossible. Trying to make sense of it, we visited a retired sheriff who had worked the original investigation. He insisted no child had ever been officially declared dead. They were just gone, he muttered, staring past us. No bodies, no evidence. Later that afternoon, an elderly woman outside the mansion overheard us talking. She leaned closer and whispered words I still hear in my nightmares. The forest never takes children, she said. It sends something back. Before either of us could respond, tiny footsteps raced across the ceiling above us. Then came a child's giggle. It drifted from behind a locked bedroom door upstairs. A small voice said clearly, Principal Dixon told us to wait. Miriam grabbed my arm as I forced the old door open. The room was empty. Only 6 muddy pairs of children's boots stood neatly beside the bed. Stories like this survive because people refuse to let them disappear. If stories like this remind you how fragile ordinary life can feel, kindly like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and which part of the story hit you the hardest. I believe this story found you today for a reason. Now let's get back to the story. My phone suddenly rang. The caller ID read, James Dixon. I answered. His voice was barely more than a whisper. Claire, don't let Miriam into the basement. I slowly turned toward her. Tears were streaming down her face. She looked at me with a mixture of terror and shame. Then she quietly said, because I was there. Miriam's words settled over the room like a weight neither of us could carry. Because I was there. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she wiped her eyes, reached into her coat pocket, and removed a small brass key. "I've never been brave enough to use this," she whispered. "James gave it to me years ago. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I'd know where it belonged." She led me downstairs into the mansion's cold basement. The air smelled of damp stone and old wood. Our flashlight beams swept across crumbling walls until Mariam stopped in front of what looked like an ordinary section of brick. Her shaking hands found a loose stone. It clicked. A narrow section of the wall slowly swung inward. Behind it was a hidden room untouched by time. Dust coated everything. Rusted children's lunchboxes sat stacked against one wall. Decades-old backpacks hung from broken hooks. School uniforms, faded report cards, cassette tapes labeled with classroom numbers, and cracked family photographs covered rusted shelves as though someone had tried to preserve an entire generation that no longer existed. It wasn't a collection. It was a memorial. Near the back of the room lay a weathered cardboard box filled with old Polaroids. One photograph made my blood run cold. It showed a much younger James Dixon, standing beside a frightened little girl I immediately recognized as a young Miriam Henderson. Around them stood more than a dozen smiling children in school clothes. Every one of them was staring directly at the camera. Every one of them had glowing white eyes. Their smiles stretched just a little too wide. I turned the photograph over. Written in faded black ink were 6 chilling words. "They don't take children, they copy them." The room seemed to grow colder. Mariam's breathing became uneven as fragments of memory began surfacing. "I remember the bus," she whispered. "The engine died. The children heard someone laughing in the woods. They all started walking toward the trees." She pressed trembling fingers against her temples. "I always believed James carried me out." She looked up at me, tears filling her eyes. "He didn't rescue me. I ran, and I never looked back." Before I could answer, footsteps echoed across the basement stairs. James Dixon stepped into the doorway, exhausted and years older than I remembered him. He lowered his flashlight. "I tried to bury the truth," he said quietly, "because no one would have believed it." His confession came in broken pieces. 25 years earlier, something inside Babcock State Park offered him a choice. One child could leave, the others would remain. In return, he surrendered every record that proved those children had ever existed. Attendance sheets, school files, official reports, names that slowly disappeared from history. Only Miriam came home. The silence shattered. Outside the mansion, laughter drifted through the night. We rushed to the windows. Dozens of children stood perfectly still beneath the trees. Pale faces, expressionless stares, glowing white eyes, smiles that looked almost human. Almost. Standing among them were the 6 fourth graders who had vanished only days earlier. One little girl slowly lifted something into the moonlight. A faded blue backpack. My backpack. The one I'd lost during a family visit to Babcock State Park when I was 9 years old. A memory exploded inside my mind. A fog, a yellow school bus, children laughing somewhere beyond the trees, strong hands pulling me backward, someone telling me never to speak about what I'd seen or what had followed me home. The children outside began chanting a name, not Claire. Another name, one I hadn't heard since I was a little girl. James's face drained of color. He looked at me with genuine horror. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "You were never supposed to remember." James's words echoed through the mansion. You were never supposed to remember. Before I could ask what he meant, every lock inside the house clicked open at once. One after another, after another. The front door drifted inward. The upstairs doors swung wide. Tiny footsteps echoed through the hallways. Children began laughing from every direction. Then the walls started knocking. Not from outside, from within. The entire mansion groaned as though something beneath its foundation had awakened. Small figures stepped into the hall. They looked like children, almost. Their pale faces never changed. Their glowing eyes reflected the moonlight pouring through the windows, and their smiles stretched unnaturally wide. James slowly raised the pistol he'd carried into the mansion. "They're not children," he whispered. "Not anymore." His voice trembled as decades of guilt finally surfaced. "They don't kill families. They erase them. They steal voices. They steal memories. They steal names. And when no one remembers the child who disappeared," he looked toward the smiling figures. "They've already won." I stared at him in disbelief. "You traded innocent children for one life." His shoulders sagged. "I thought I was saving someone. You chose. I know. I've been waiting 25 years for them to come back and collect the rest." Beside me, Miriam fought back tears. Every memory she had lost was returning. She looked at James not as the principal who had guided generations of students, but as the frightened young teacher who had lived with one impossible decision for most of his life. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she whispered. James nodded slowly. "I don't expect you to." Outside, the children parted silently. One stepped forward carrying my faded blue backpack. The moment I looked at it, another memory crashed into me. I hadn't simply gotten lost in Babcock State Park when I was 9. I had crossed into the trees. I had followed the laughter. Something had found me there. Something had walked back out. James looked at me with heartbreaking pity. "It left a piece of itself inside you," he said. "That's why they came back." The nearest child smiled wider. James fired. The gunshot exploded through the mansion. The bullet passed straight through the child as though it were smoke. Then, every child laughed, first with James's voice, then with mine, then with Mariam's. The walls dissolved into towering trees. The wooden floors became damp forest ground. Moonlight poured through branches that hadn't existed seconds before. The mansion and Babcock Forest had become one. There was no longer any way to tell where the house ended and the woods began. By sunrise, state police found the mansion empty. No bodies, no blood, only dozens of muddy footprints leading away toward Babcock State Park. The official report blamed exposure, mass hysteria, and animal activity. No one ever mentioned the laughter. If you loved this story, please don't scroll away, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from and which part of the story hit you the hardest. We've got more powerful, emotional stories coming your way. And trust me, you don't want to miss them. Weeks later, my phone vibrated, At exactly 2:13 a.m., the voicemail was only 12 seconds long. James whispered, "School starts Monday." Children laughed in the background. Then a little girl softly asked, "Miss Claire, are you coming back to the forest? Or should we come back to class?" I deleted the message. It reappeared the next morning. Some people in West Virginia still say that if you hear children laughing in Babcock State Park after sunset, never answer your phone because the voice calling your name may already know who you used to be.